All right. So thank you all of us for joining us for this law career chat. We are excited to have the Law Society once again collaborate with the CDC and getting professionals from the law field to talk to our students and to learn more about what it is to practice law. Just so you know, we have another law event next Wednesday. It's already live on Handshake, but I'll be doing some marketing about that in the next few days. So we ask that you come back for that career chat next week. But let's go ahead and get started with the main event. I'm going to turn things over to David. David Kim is our current Law Society president. He will introduce our esteemed guest. Once again, just before I turn everything over, if you're just joining us, to make sure to put in your net ID into the chat box function so that we can track your attendance, and then also put in your questions into the chat box function so that we can keep track of all your questions, but know that we may not be answering those questions until the latter half of today's presentation. So David, I'll turn everything over to you.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Hi everyone, I'm David Kim. I'm a senior at NYU Abu Dhabi. And before we get started, just a quick housekeeping. For people who feel comfortable, could you please turn on the camera for the call so that our guest doesn't feel like he's speaking into a screen of darkness. Of course, if you don't feel comfortable, if today's not your best day, like no worries at all. But insofar as you feel comfortable sharing your screen, please do so. And without further ado, I'll be introducing our guest, Vinoo Varghese. If you could please take a minute to introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, where you went to school, your current title and organization, what organization you're a part of, that would be much appreciated.
So Vinoo Varghese, I run a law firm called Varghese and Associates. I went to NYU in the 90s, early 90s, and long before all of you guys were born. And I graduated from the College of Arts and Science. I was a philosophy major. I went to Brooklyn Law School after working for 3 years between college and law school, and started my career as a prosecutor. And I've been doing my criminal defense for the last 15 years. So we do a lot of cases around New York and around the country. Some of the cases have made the newspapers. We've done a lot of high-profile cases. I'm also a television legal analyst. I appear on various cable news programs and international news programs as well. So it's about as short as I can do. I'd rather you be asking questions, David. So I'm ready. You know.
Yeah, of course. So I have a couple of questions prepared that I'll be running through, and once we're done with the questions, we'll look at some of the things that the audience asked, and we can ask those if your question hasn't been answered. And before we go on, just to note, Vinoo studied philosophy during his time at NYU, and as a philosophy major, I highly encourage everyone to take at least the course. It's a phenomenal pre-law major, just a little plug in there. But I'll be going on to the questions that we have prepared. So number one is, Vinoo, how did you decide law was the right path for you?
Well, what happened was my first career as a shortstop for the Mets didn't work out. My second career as point guard for the Knicks didn't work out either. So I had to figure out something else to do. And so I did play sports in high school. I wrestled, I ran track, but I also did debate. And with speech and debate, it was a national thing. I did it 1 year at NYU. I didn't really want to compete and travel when I was in college, but it was something I always knew since I was a little kid, when the athletic career didn't pan out.
Well, philosophy and debate sound like a good formula for a successful legal career.
I will add one thing about being a lawyer, and just it was something I can't say I came up with this. One of the deans at my law school, it always stuck with me. He gave this introductory talk, and he said, the reason to be a lawyer is that you can be the power and fight the power. So that's also a big reason. I mean, I was already in law school. I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, but I think for those of you who are thinking about it, it is a way to be the power and fight the power.
Yeah, that's really insightful. So the second question is, which collegiate experiences helped prepare you for law school?
I think part of it, the great thing about a school like NYU, it's so diverse. There's so many different people. I came from primarily Irish Catholic all-boy school that I went to, high school, which was a terrific experience. But at the same time, you get to NYU and you meet so many people from all around the world. It's just that life learning, I think, is just tremendous. And I was involved in the various Asian groups. I was the president of the South Asian Student Association 1 year. I was also involved, had good relationships with all the different Asian affinity groups that were there. I was also an RA for 2 years. The RA position was fairly a good training because, you deal with leadership, you deal with accountability. I remember having to take, drunk residents out to St. Vincent's Hospital in the Village, where they were drinking too much at night. Maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but I had to go instead of the emergency room with them. I remember those nights, which kind of like reminded me of my early years as a prosecutor when I was in the complaint room drafting complaints till 4 o'clock in the morning to process new arrests. So, and sometimes and also going to crime scenes and taking statements with detectives. So these are, to the extent that these were formative, I think, they were.
On that note, actually, about our collegiate experiences, since all of our audience today are undergraduate students, would you also have advice for our students in terms of classes to take or a particular extracurricular activity that you would recommend for people who are interested in a career in law?
Well, the reality is you don't have to take any particular class if you're going to be a lawyer, because the law is so broad and so varied. If you see an interest, so those of you who are science background can think about something like patent law, and that's a separate bar you would have to take. But if you graduate with a science degree, that's something you can do. So aside from your regular state bar exam, you can take the patent bar, which allows you to practice before the patent office. That's one thing that people go into that particular field. For everyone else, I mean, the patent lawyers are a very tiny percentage of lawyers. For everyone else, a broad-based liberal arts degree, I think, is most helpful. I mean, to give you, to the extent that you can take those kind of classes. David, when you and I spoke, you mentioned you took some kind of First Amendment class. I think it's fantastic. I had stuff like that when I was at NYU. So anything really, as long as you're interested in a service-based industry, which is what law is. So let me just add one thing, which is, I speak at different schools, I speak at different law schools. And one of the things that people, when you think about being a lawyer, if your sole goal in life is to make money, don't go into law, right? You can make money as a lawyer and you can actually live a very good life, but you just have to work harder for it. If your sole goal is to make money, go into finance, go, start a business, that kind of thing, right? But if you've got to understand, when you go into law, you're in a business that's there to help people. It's a service industry. I get paid to help people. I get paid to, kick government butt, and I enjoy it, so I get a thrill out of it, people were like, oh, you used to be a prosecutor. That was so long ago, right? And it was the foundation of my legal experience, but you've got to, that's the kind of focus you want to be in. So whatever area of law, so whether it's litigation, criminal litigation that I do, or if it's even civil litigation or even transactional work. I told David yesterday that I used to always, snub my nose at those lawyers who were paper pushers, who did, reading contracts, all that stuff, until I needed them, right? So I signed a 7-year lease in my office on Wall Street. I can't read the fine print. That's not what I went to law school to do. So I pay an attorney, guy I went to law school with, who's fantastic, and they're essential. So whatever your bent is, I think, it's important to keep in mind that the law fundamentally is about helping people.
So you just mentioned litigation, like lawyers who specialize in litigation, other lawyers who do more transactional work. But for our students who may be unfamiliar with these terms, would you mind elaborating a little bit more about the differences between lawyers involved in litigation and transactional work?
So the simplest way to break it down is lawyers are involved in court proceedings as litigation, right? So it doesn't mean necessarily having to go to court. It can mean writing. It can be doing the legal research, preparing what we're called briefs, submissions to the court. It can also mean arguing in court. And there's various levels. There's a trial level. There's on the civil side, there's what we call depositions. On the transactional side is everything else that involves reading of contracts. I mentioned patent law. That's transactional, creating and filing a patent with the United States Patent Office. There are so many different types of transactions, real estate transactions, your closings, things like that. Those lawyers are very important. They provide an important service. You know, I can't, you know, after, as I said, after starting to hire these guys to help me out in my business, I realized how important they are.
That's helpful to know, because I personally didn't really know what the differences were until very recently. Well, number 3, can you tell us more about the type of law you actually practice?
So
you're doing criminal litigation specifically, right?
Criminal defense, correct.
Criminal defense.
And it really, it's sort of a misnomer, because it should be called criminal justice, you know, criminal justice defense, because, you know, the term criminal presupposes that someone is guilty, right? And so our in the American judicial system, it is about, you know, there is a presumption of innocence. It's in the law, and in every case, every defendant is presumed innocent, but that's not the reality. Once you're charged with a crime, or you're suspected of a crime, there is a presumption of guilt. And our job, you know, the burden of proof rests on the government to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. But the difference between a client getting cleared is really, in a large part, due to that person's lawyer. And so the lawyer who understands the system, the criminal defense attorney who understands the system, is the one that can go on the offense at times and take steps, because you often do have to prove your innocence, even though the system says you don't, right? The system says the government has to prove your guilt, but you don't have to prove your innocence. The reality is, to walk away from a criminal case, you often have to prove your innocence, or prove at least that you're not guilty of the crime, or the government can't prove the crime. I don't want you to get the wrong impression here that I only represent innocent people. I don't, right? And a lot of people that look at it and say, how do you do that? How can you represent? If somebody comes to you and tells you they're guilty, will you still represent them? I was like, of course. Why wouldn't I? Right? Because that's what I do, right? The system, the Constitution, particularly the 6th Amendment of the United States Constitution, guarantees you the right to counsel, guarantees you the right to a public trial, a jury trial in a criminal case. These are bedrock principles, and I can go on about the history of that, coming from the common law in England and all of that. But what it means is that you are guaranteed the right to have a lawyer. And one of the interesting things is, around this country, due to coronavirus, most of these governors have instituted stay-in orders, you know, for people, right? People are locked in. I understand you guys are too. Almost all the states, with the exception of New York and Michigan, I don't know why Michigan, but I kind of have an idea why New York, designated lawyers as essential, all lawyers. Governor Cuomo here in New York did not. And the minute he instituted his order of the shutdown, what he declared was an essential business, like, for example, liquor stores are essential business, right? But lawyers aren't in New York. So I wrote an op-ed. I published, I was really irritated. And I wrote an op-ed. It got published in the New York Daily News. So he issued his order on a Friday. I published my op-ed on a Saturday. By Sunday evening, he had declared criminal defense lawyers as essential. So that also was in conjunction. It wasn't all me, but certainly I knew he had got to him. But, you know, me moving the way I did also spurred some of the bar associations to push for this. And so still, all lawyers are not essential in New York, but criminal defense lawyers are.
Yeah, I read the op-ed piece, and we'll send around the link after the meeting today, and I recommend everyone else to read it too. It's really helpful. Actually, this is a question I forgot to ask before, but did you go straight to law school, or did you take some time off after your time at NYU?
I worked for about 3 years. So I worked 2 years up in social services. Then I taught for the Princeton Review, a couple of years teaching, you know, standardized test courses before I went to law school.
Did you find that time helpful in terms of when you were at law school later, or like, is that something you would highly recommend to students, or would
Yeah.
you say that it didn't really make a difference? How was your personal experience?
I can't stress it enough. I highly recommend time off between college and law school. I think it's critical that people have real world experience, understand what it's like to pay your own bills. I think all of this is important. The law, and it's something that you guys, most of you probably don't know, the law, at least in in the United States, has the highest rate of alcoholism, depression, and suicide amongst lawyers of any profession. Maybe dentists are up there too. I'm not sure, but I know the law is up there. It is a leader in almost all of these. And why is that? Because often when people go straight through law school, I mean, from college, high school, college, you're now a 25-year-old by the time, if you've gone straight, you're around 25 years old. And your first job in life, for a lot of people, their first job, they're lawyers, is in life as a lawyer. And the pressure of being a lawyer is intense, right? Their schedule, their demands, like unlike in any other profession. Well, maybe save for being a medical resident, but you do, at least in medical school, your last year you're doing real rotation. You're in the hospital, you get a taste of that. A lot of times as lawyers, unless you've done clinical experiences during law school, which I did, which actually helped me a lot. Your first job as a lawyer, it's most people don't have the maturity level of that. And if you take it also to put it a prosecutor, a young prosecutor right out of law school who has no real world experience can now put somebody in prison. That's an awesome responsibility to lay on the hands of some 25-year-old kid who's never experienced anything in life. Not all 25s are equal. 25-year-olds are equal. I'm not saying they all are, but this is a problem. And I saw that with people in law school when I was in law school, and I saw that when I was a prosecutor because I was a little bit older, right? Because I had worked for a few years between college and law school, and their focus and view is unless you've had some life experiences, I think it's the law would be better if it required like the NBA 1 year of college basketball before coming in. The law should make it mandatory at least 1 year. I would say 2 years, but that's just me.
So you talk about the importance of having life experience before matriculating into law school, but do you have certain recommendations for what type of life experience you have in mind for students who may be searching for things to do before matriculating?
Look, a lot of people used to recommend being a paralegal, doing that. I think that's good to get a taste of that. I have one of my interns, a legal assistants, is here on the call. She's a student, current sophomore at NYU. She's getting quite the experience. I have hired a lot of NYU undergrads over the years. A large number of them went to law school. Some of them didn't. The ones that are successful. So there's a CAS blog about me and the number of students that I've hired over the years, and a lot of them are in law school. So I would suggest if you get a taste of the law, that's important, but it doesn't have to be. You can work in a completely different area. And I know people who did wide range of things. I mean, like there are some people that go into medical litigation, like personal injury, like so in my law school class, there was a doctor, there was a nurse. I mean, so we had a wide range of people who did different things. Other guys who were in finance, who decided to go into law.
The diversity is really, it's good to hear, so that it's not like we have to check certain boxes before going and taking the next step for law school. And the next question is, at what point did you decide that being a defense attorney was a type of law you wanted to practice?
So I was a prosecutor out of law school, straight out of law school. I was in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. And I joke around, people ask me that question all the time. What made you switch from being a prosecutor to a defense lawyer? And I said, well, I didn't want to be poor anymore. So that was often the kind of funny response that I tell people, which was, there's some aspect of that, which is, when you're a prosecutor, you're not getting paid that much. And, law school loans, I mean, a lot of people go work for large law firms and they pay their loans back faster. But for me, it was a lot more than that. It was the idea, I no longer wanted to be a prosecutor. I had had a great experience. I had done some good stuff. I had a range of experience between investigative, trial work, and appellate work. But the politics of a prosecutor's office are intense. And, there are decisions that are made, like, for example, you get calls down and you're like, okay, this guy is going to have a higher offer than this person, even though this person did the same thing. Why is that? When I say offer, a recommendation for sentencing or a potential plea deal. And you're like, why is that? Well, you learn later on that somebody has a connection to a boss and things like this, and he's going to get a better deal or whatever. Or there's going to be people in a certain neighborhood they designate as high crime. So you're like, okay, there's too many people selling drugs in the corner of Crown Heights, in Brooklyn. And this is, now Crown Heights is a lot more gentrified than it was when I worked as a prosecutor, right? So, but then, the people in Browns, versus the people in, less of an emphasis on drug prosecution in, nicer areas of Brooklyn, like Park Slope and whatever it is, Brooklyn Heights and things like this. So you look at this and you say to myself, and I said to myself, I was tired of this. I was a soldier in the war on drugs. I think it's the biggest mistake, one of the biggest mistakes in American history. And the amount of people incarcerated, particularly, young Black men, I think a travesty. And if we had focused on money, on prevention and all that stuff. I mean, I started looking at it, you start realizing it. You go in as a prosecutor, like, oh, drugs are bad. And then you're like, nah. So I'm actually pleasantly surprised with sort of the change in culture, which has not hit the federal level, by the way. It's hit, a lot of the states are making progress in this area, trying to work and reduce some of the drug prosecutions and things. But, there's fierce resistance from prosecutors. There's fierce resistance from the prison lobby. Right? The prison lobby in America depends on putting, Black men in jail. It does. So, I started realizing this halfway through. I didn't want to do drug cases, but that's the majority of prosecutions, at the time. Some of the prosecutors now are a little bit more enlightened, it seems. But it hasn't made its way to the federal level. I mean, there's been minimal stuff. I mean, and that's a big problem.
So for the next question, once you became a defense attorney, why did you decide to start your own law firm?
So when I left the DA's office, I had joined a small criminal defense practice. And I realized, because I wasn't 100% sure, how I do as a criminal defense lawyer, and stuff, because, having done prosecution for so long, 5.5 years, I said, let me, check it out. So I tried at a small firm. I ended up liking the work, but not liking the place I was working at. And so I started my own practice. It was just me for the first 3 years. And then I started hiring. My first admin was an NYU grad, but I fired her after a month because she sucked. But, after that, I hired a young woman who I met when she was 19. She was Mexican. She used to translate. I didn't speak Spanish at the time. Now my Spanish is pretty good, actually. But she would translate some of her family members I represented, and I hired her, and she's been with me since. She left me for a couple years to have a couple babies, and now she's back full time. And then since then I started hiring lawyers and things, and the practice grew, so. I have a nice office on the corner of Broadway and Wall Street. My window overlooks Hamilton's grave. And so, if you guys are in the neighborhood, come and visit.